Do you feel that your Google Ads are stuck? Like, regardless of what you do, you hit this invisible ceiling or your ROAS drops for no apparent reason? If that sounds familiar, then I can tell you the problem is usually not that you have the wrong bidding strategy or that you have some small nuanced issue with one of your campaigns, but rather the actual changes that you are making in your account. Most people ask themselves, like, how many changes should I actually make? And when something goes wrong, they start to get hectic, they start to panic, and they push a bunch of buttons. And in today's video, I don't want to give you a number of what the perfect amount of changes really is, but I want to give you a super detailed, exact framework that we use here at Cartlift to determine how to optimize an account, how to get it out of a very sort of bad situation, how to scale it to the next level, and many other things. So with that being said, let's get started right away. So the three different types of ad managers out there are the do nothing manager, the frantic button pusher, and the fireman, right? The do nothing manager, pretty self-explanatory, someone who's just sitting there not really doing much, because to a degree Google Ads can run on autopilot, but the problem is if you let them run on autopilot, you will never get to a volume level that you could be at. And I have never seen an account that is being sort of left alone, even if it performs okay, that could be scaled or that is being scaled as much as it could be, right? I'm talking 2, 3, 4x of the current ad budget. Then the frantic button pusher, pretty straightforward as well, constantly being active, just randomly trying things, constantly in the account, making tiny little nuanced changes, thinking that this will somehow optimize the account, or quite frankly, just to look active. But this isn't that much better than the do nothing manager, because you are constantly destroying any progress, you are constantly harming the algorithm, and so on and so forth. And then we have the third type, the fireman, basically sitting there, not doing much, but if something goes wrong, being like super reactive, trying to counteract that with like, okay, now I have to create 3 new campaigns, change the bidding strategy. Then it goes into like a downward spiral, because these very sort of immediate changes that you are just making because you have seen a drop in performance for a day or a week are not bringing in any value at all. So those are the 3 account manager types. And with that being said, I want to now talk about the main topic of this video, which is the framework that we are using that I like to call the risk-reward matrix. You see, whenever making a change or at least somewhat significant change, I think you can put it into 1 out of 4 quadrants, right? The first quadrant is the low risk, high reward one, which is amazing. Then you have the high risk, high reward one, you have the low risk, low reward, and you have the high risk, low reward. So if you think about these 4 individual quadrants, it's pretty clear that the gold mine, right? The best changes that you can make are in this first quadrant. It's low risk, high reward. So for example, if you have an account that has no negative keywords yet, or just very, very few, and you do a very vast negative keyword research for the first time, you come up with like 500 super powerful negative keywords, there is almost no chance that this won't benefit the account, possibly in a major way, right? Or if you have an absolutely terribly optimized product feed, you know, all your product titles have just like 2 words in them, they're not descriptive at all, there are no keywords in there, and so on and so forth, and you go ahead and you do one-time feed optimization. Or maybe you have a bunch of search campaigns as an e-commerce brand, but you don't have an active shopping campaign, you know, with a good granular setup with multiple products and categories and so on and so forth. You see, those low risk, high reward activities are not super common. It's not that, you know, I open the Google Ads account of a client and I'm like, oh yeah, I can, you know, apply these 10 low risk, high reward changes right now. Sometimes you get a few of them when starting with a new account, and it's not that rare that we get a new account with a decent ad spend like 40, 50,000 a month, right? And we can immediately save 10, 20, 30% of that due to a whole bunch of low risk, high reward activities, because very often they sort of hide under the surface as well. But those are like your absolute gold mine activities. And whenever you can, of course, you should implement them as soon as you see them, right? And that is extremely important. Next up, we have the high risk, high reward. And here it gets a bit more nuanced. So basically, high risk, high reward means that you can potentially see a ton of sort of performance from them, more volume, more profits, etc. But they are also somewhat risky. So they are typically needed to a degree, possibly to really break through a plateau, right? You typically cannot break through a sales plateau. Let's say you are at making 300,000 per month on Google Ads, and you want to get to that 500-600K level. Typically, you cannot do that by just increasing a few budgets and playing it like super, super safe. Even though, of course, and I cannot emphasize that enough, it is important that you sort of sustain your best performers. So the worst thing that can happen is that you have a bunch of great campaigns, you come up with something totally new, pause the old one, of course, because you believe that this new setup will be better. I've seen that a lot, actually, but that is something that you want to avoid. But let's say, for example, you are making a complete creative overhaul for PMax, for example, right? All your PMax assets, because they're doing kind of okay, but most of your revenue comes from shopping within PMax, only like 20% comes from assets. So you think about, okay, let's do a full creative overhaul. This is not a total no-brainer because first of all, you have to put some time and effort into it. And second of all, that is a gigantic change for a PMax campaign. So it might also go the other way, but it's a great example of a high risk, high reward change. At the same time, we could argue, for example, that adding a PMax campaign in the first place, when so far you have been super reliant on shopping and search, is also a high risk, high reward change, because chances are PMax will, even though since last November that's not typically the case anymore, but it is of course very possible and potentially profitable that the PMax campaign will take the traffic, especially from shopping, and use it for itself. But at the same time, if the shopping campaign went quite well, chances are also that PMax will not perform as well as the original shopping campaign. So those changes are very tricky, but nonetheless, it can make sense to use them in certain contexts. And I will talk a little bit more about this towards the end of this video, when to pick which sort of change, how to look for them, and so on and so forth. Then we have the third quadrant, and that is probably the most common one, like almost your daily bread and butter, and that is low risk, low reward. In other words, like incremental improvements. That is the classical case, and I would say 80 to 90% of our time is spent there, especially with more established accounts that we work with for a while. I mean, we have clients that are with us here at Cartlift for 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, right? And at some point, of course, you're not like, again, opening the account and being like, wow, there are 5 super obvious low risk, high reward changes that we completely forgot about. Instead, it's constantly trying new things that add up, 3% of volume here, 5% there, 10% there. And over time, of course, this really adds up. In the beginning, yes, you can scale from spending 20K to spending 60K potentially in just a few short months. We have even seen cases where this is possible in like 6 weeks or something. But at some point and at some level, of course, it's not as exponential as that. So with that said, one example would be, for example, you have 20 best-selling products, and for 2 of them, you realize that you lack some keywords, some really powerful keywords in the product title in shopping, right? It's not a totally unoptimized title, but it could be quite a bit better. You might get 20% more CTR from this, which gives you 20% more clicks, which may give you 20% more sales for these specific products. Or you could, for example, take a search campaign with and a search ad with 15 headlines, and you think about replacing 3 of them that are underperforming. You put new headlines in, and because they were getting, let's say, 15%, 20% of the impressions, if they perform better now, again, it's a measurable thing, but it won't double the volume of your account. But the thing here is, the main benefit is that those, of course, really add up. Okay, so adding a bunch of low risk, low reward changes, and they actually play out well. This is what gets your account, really scaled. And when I look across our biggest brands that we managed so far, I'm talking 300,000 per month in Google Ad spend alone, right? Several million in monthly revenue. It was a mix of like all the ones that we mentioned so far, but with a strong tendency at some point towards the low risk, low reward. Many people think that when you are a Google Ads expert, doing this for years, you just see all these things that were super obvious and where you just have to click 3 buttons and now it works. But in reality, it's just a lot of testing, a bunch of things, going through these framework, going through these strategies, doing things in the best possible way and really stacking them on top of each other. And then we have the fourth quadrant, and that's the only one that you should really, really avoid, and that makes almost no sense. And you already guessed it, high risk, low reward, right? It's for absolute amateurs. You should avoid it. It almost kind of never makes sense. That's where literally like impatience destroys the campaign. So let's say you have a PMAX campaign, it is quite profitable, it has a target ROAS of 400%, but you say like, I could get a bit more profitability out of this whole thing, so let me set the target to 650% for whatever reason. I've seen those cases, right? So those are real world examples. And now this tanks the entire PMAX account because Google cannot find you any customers at that high of a target anymore. The campaign tanks, it was the main conversion driver of the account, now the entire account tanks. And I've literally seen cases where an entire account couldn't recover from such a significant change for literally months, right? I had clients come to us telling us like, hey, we completely rely on this one big PMAX, but since this one random change 3 months ago that we made or that our agency made or whatever, we cannot recover, right? And the PMAX since then has dropped 70% in spend and we cannot get it back. So those things are real. Therefore, you should have a very good reason for making a drastic, in this case, adjustment to the ROAS target of your absolute best performing campaigns, even though, of course, this was just an example. So now you have the 4 different quadrants, but the question is when and how do you apply them? Well, scenario 1 is the account is on fire, right? So the account is a dumpster fire basically, and this is where you live in the high risk, high reward environment, because if you need to get some results quickly, and don't get me wrong, low risk, high reward, of course, is always best. But in this case, I'm taking for granted that you already looked at those, right? Because they are, as I said, relatively rare, at least when you are in a very sophisticated and mature account. So high risk, high reward, because if you're not profitable or if you're barely breaking even or if you really need to put on more volume because otherwise the channel Google Ads is not really worth it to you, then you have to rethink and you have to look at high risk, high reward changes, okay? Because quite frankly, in this case, you do not really have anything to lose. I wouldn't recommend high risk, high reward changes if the account goes perfectly well. If the account goes okay, you can test them every now and then, but if the account is really in trouble, if you just lost a ton of performance or if you have never performed in the first place, yes, this is a good scenario to look at those high risk, high reward quadrant action items, so to speak. Scenario 2 is the account is stable and just works. And in this case, you just want to protect what's currently working. And this is, of course, low risk, low reward. That's where we spend, as I said, most of our time. You using controlled bid adjustments. When you change your targets, it's not in a gigantic range. You do all the changes. You make all the changes that I just mentioned. And everything is focused on maintaining performance while growing. And the second part, while growing, is very important because many people think that at some point a Google Ads account isn't scalable anymore. And this is very rarely the case. There is usually always something that you can do, whether it's in the classical shopping search PMAX channels or something more creative and unique, like YouTube ads, demand gen, building a new editorial funnel around those things, what we're doing with some clients as well. And this is something that is always worth testing because you can grow. Almost any Google Ads account can be scaled further. I've seen very few cases where it's like a super specific niche product where literally anything but search and shopping is impossible. You have all the active buying intent already. And yes, maybe at that point you cannot scale much further, but that's, I would say, fewer than 3% of the cases, right? So it's extremely rare. And now we have scenario 3, which might actually even be the most common one, and that is when you have completely plateaued. So you are generally happy, but you just need more volume at the same time, and you have been trying things for a very long time. So it's not like as stable, as profitable and sort of constantly growing as in the scenario 2, but you really have sit at a certain level for quite a long time and nothing really worked. And here you need sort of a balanced, sophisticated mix, right? High risk, high reward might be the thing that gets you to the very next level, and I've seen it time and time again. Also, of course, a very well put together mix of many low risk, low reward activities over the course of, let's say, a month or two can get you there as well. But usually it has to be some sort of mix. Again, low risk, high reward, probably you've tried those before, but you'd be surprised. I've seen cases where brands have been stuck at like 50,000 per month in ad spend. And when I audited the account and I went through it for like 2 hours or something, I realized there were actually like 3 low risk, high reward activities that they still haven't done yet. So this might be possible as well. But if you are at an absolute plateau and no matter what you do, it doesn't work, then you need this mix of all the 3, except of course the one that we kind of never want to use high risk, low reward. But the other three, you might sprinkle in, you might test all kinds of things, because hitting the plateau on Google is very, very common. And for many brands and for many ad managers, it's very difficult to get out of this thing. So as a conclusion, you want to always ask yourself, what's the best change I can make in a hierarchical sort of way, right? There is no this one answer, you always have to do this, but you really have to think about, okay, where am I? And what are some activities that I can do right now rather than just button pushing? In other words, it's more quality over quantity and really thinking about it in a strategic way, sort of step by step by step. Now, if you are in any of those situations, like in a plateau or your account is unprofitable or you just want to scale further, then I invite you to an Ignite demo where basically I sit down with you, not one of those blah, blah sales calls that are just pure fluff, but instead I prepare exactly what I mentioned here in this video for you. And in the call, we actually discuss how this might look like for you. So what are some like low risk, high reward, low risk, low reward activities for your specific case? What's the potential of your brand on Google? How far may it be scaled? And much, much more. And if you ultimately say this sounds great and you want to work with us, awesome. Otherwise, you can just take all of that, leave, and that's great as well. So you can find the link to the Ignite demo in the description. I look forward to talk to you there. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, please subscribe for more Google Ads and performance marketing content for e-commerce. And with that being said, I really look forward to see you in the next video again. Thank you very much and bye-bye.